I am Sana Al Sukhun, medical oncologist and hematologist from Jordan, director of Al Hayat Oncology Practice in Amman, Jordan, past president of the Jordanian Oncology Society, also past chair of the International Affairs Committee of ASCO, uh, also currently chairing the metastatic breast cancer resource stratified guidelines at ASCO, with past experience working with the Global Policy Committee of ESMO and also the Educational Committee of ASCO, in addition to being part of the Arab Medical Association Against Cancer.
Thank you. And from your perspective, what are the most pressing challenges in cancer care in Jordan, but also in the MENA region?
Let's talk about cancer care. Cancer care goes into a cycle from prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and supportive care. So if you start by prevention, the concept of prevention is still an emerging concept in, I think, around the world, and especially in countries of limited resources, including the MENA region. Not all of the MENA region, by the way, is limited resources, but mostly it is. And this is something we need to work on because people don't and cannot indeed believe that you can prevent cancer. Very few are aware that 1/3 of all cancer cases worldwide can be prevented. These are concepts that we are in Jordan. During my term as president, we launched a campaign from north to south through all cities, talking to students in universities, in schools, the community about prevention and early detection. So Jordan, I'm proud to say, I think we are making huge strides when it comes to that. However, our neighboring countries, very few, if any, have tackled the issue of prevention and early detection. You know, like prevention, talk about smoking. Unfortunately, we rank number 1 in the region in terms of smoking prevalence among men. Or 2/3 of our men do smoke, things like that. You know, talk about healthy diet, exercise, healthy weight, things like that. Now, I believe this is a struggle for most countries with limited resources to identify this as an important goal to achieve cancer care. Then you move on to treatment. You know, if you're from a country with limited resources, you could be a middle-income country or a low-income country, and we have both flavors in the MENA region. Very few are high-income countries, but let's focus on the majority. So in the low-income countries, you have a huge shortage when it comes to the workforce. Workforce are not I'm not referring only to oncologists, but also nurses, pharmacists, you know, those who can support you to deliver your work properly. In addition to shortage when it comes to access to knowledge. But when it comes to middle-income countries like Jordan, I believe we do have an excellent ensemble of, if I could call it, ensemble of workforce for oncology when it comes to nurses, doctors trained abroad, properly trained. We have cancer center, we have private practices, also cancer centers and private practice in public, even in the military. So middle-income countries do have the workforce, do have the access to knowledge. Now, they actually struggle when it comes to access to treatment. Another element in common with low-income countries. So you know what to use, you don't have access to it. For example, most of the recently approved therapeutics are crazy expensive. They're out of reach for institutions, for public services, for individuals, even private practice. Nobody can access and sustain that access to these medications. They can be available. For example, in Jordan, most of the new medications are available. The question is, who can afford them? And for how long? Those are the challenges. Particularly, expense is a huge challenge in Jordan and many middle and low-income countries, which represent at least two-thirds of the countries that unfortunately have the new cancer cases, as you know. Two-thirds of the new cancer cases are diagnosed in countries of low and middle income stratification. So this is a challenge. In addition, a very unfortunate challenge that has been tackled for at least a couple of decades so far without great success, the challenge of having clinical trials in countries of limited resources. They harbor two-thirds of the new cancer cases. They host those patients. They should have access to the new options. It's a win-win situation. If you're going to conduct a clinical trial for a new medication, you better conduct it where patients are. And they are not in countries of high-income countries. Yes, they are there, but the majority are, unfortunately, countries of limited resources. So clinical trials, to really fast-track themselves, they better be expanding to countries of limited resources. Now, this is a huge challenge. We talked about it in the International Affairs Committee of ASCO. We indeed have a policy statement published by ASCO. I was privileged to co-author this paper with colleagues from around the globe, addressing these challenges for clinical trials. To summarize, and I would invite you to a talk I gave about this at OncoDaily, a global cancer movement launch initiative. It's at different levels. You start with the physician level. Not all of us are tuned to go through the hassle of conducting a clinical trial, enrolling patients in clinical trials. You need support for that. It's not just the patient come in and you try a new drug. There is protocol, a whole process behind conducting an ethically approved clinical trial. So you need physicians well-trained and tuned to go through the process. You do need infrastructure, and pharma here can help to build the infrastructure because it's a win-win situation to fast-track its own drug development. You need government to support and develop rules and ethics to govern the conduction of clinical trials and adapt them to the society or community of concern. You cannot apply just, you can have international laws, rules, but they have to be adapted to the specific society through a government. And you need the pharma to believe that you can do that. So, and probably you need some NGOs to put all these together. The workforce, infrastructure, pharma, government, and funding to start. I was talking to your colleague about the International Patient Coalition. Patients need to also believe that clinical trials can be of help. They need to be educated. They need to be aware of the potential that clinical trials could help them access drugs they cannot access otherwise. But at the same time, you need pharma to understand that once a patient is put in a clinical trial, once that clinical trial is over, patients should ethically have access to the drug they have been put on. Lots of things probably I have tackled within these 5 minutes, but there are, so far we could identify all the obstacles. We talk a lot about them. We discussed them. I remember ESMO and ASCO talked about all this. But to see steps taken in and real action taken, so far it's been hard. I have seen some action taken. The International Fund for chemotherapy or targeted therapy purchase for countries of limited resources started. It did a great job. I believe they have 50 or so countries. Probably that number expanded since I joined their last meeting. But we need to expand that more like Gavi to be for not only chemotherapy, but also new targeted therapies, immune therapy. Um, it needs more collaboration, better um, awareness from governments that this is really helpful for them to help support, because I don't believe individuals by themselves without support of their governments can introduce these major changes into societies.
You mentioned that patients should have more belief, more faith into patient organizations. So what do you think, in your opinion, what are the most common misconceptions that patients have when it comes to cancer care?
As I mentioned earlier, patients are not aware that they can potentially reduce the risk of having cancer. Education and awareness is key. Probably it's as important as treatment, because you reduce the burden for the society, you create more budget, take care of those who are actually sick. So prevention is something that patients need to understand is its potential. Early detection is also important. And more important than these two is that, prevention is important, early detection is important, but if you don't believe that the disease you detect can be treated and cured if it's early, there is no point to talk about early detection. And this is something most of organizations forget to talk about. They encourage early detection, they have catchy slogans for early detection. Nobody talks about effective treatment for early disease. And not only effective treatment, you need tolerable treatment. Nobody talks about tolerability of treatment, considering the good supportive care we have right now. So these are important facts to talk about, educate, and spread awareness about among different patient societies. And then you come to the next step of talking about, once they understand that, talking about clinical trials and the potential, the pros and cons, and their important role in introducing clinical trials in their communities. It's not only the physician who should do all the job. Even if you bring a clinical trial and your patients think they are quote unquote guinea pigs, lots of societies in low-income countries think about new drugs when introduced through a clinical trial. They are experimental. They are using the patients. Yeah, the patient is doing a great favor for his or her fellow humans when they are enrolled in a clinical trial. But the clinical trial has a sound background, scientific background, and ethical background. It's not just conducted because a physician wants to give that drug. These are very important pieces of information to really talk about when we consider cancer care for patients. And finally, palliative care. We always talk about palliative chemotherapy when we discuss, or palliative treatment when we discuss metastatic setting. I'm not sure if the term is actually that fortunate. When you have pain, I give you some pain medication to relieve your pain. The pain medication I give you is palliative because it palliates your agony. So palliative care does not mean the patient is hopeless. It only means it's there to improve their quality of life. That's another misconception, actually, even among physicians outside the field. I can go on, but I think these are the basic important elements to focus and discuss when you are talking about cancer care with patients.
So, to conclude, what advice would you give to patients who are newly diagnosed and they're maybe feeling overwhelmed? What would be your take-home message to the patients?
I'd say, first, you have to have a strong belief that you will get better. You have to be optimistic. You have to trust your physician. You can get a second and third and fourth opinion, but choose one physician to walk the journey with. choose your trusted sources. Google in general is not your trusted source. You have very well trustworthy websites that can educate you. I will not mention any of these right now because I'm not marketing any of these, but you can go back to your physician and he or she can suggest some trustworthy websites for you to explain your situation. Like any kind of treatment, you can have hiccups, but treatment is meant to improve your quality of life. Discuss with your physician, trust in the process, be optimistic, and like any other treatment, even if you have side effects, stay positive. Treatment has improved dramatically and early disease can be hopefully cured if not controlled, or controlled not if not cured.